The better that you get at all of these skills, the more you put yourself in a position where you no longer need anyone else's help, because no one else can coach you better than you can coach yourself. And again, the reason that is they can't feel what you feel. We are going over the first and most important skill, which is how to gauge difficulty. And when I say gauge difficulty, I don't mean something was easy, medium, hard, or something was challenging. We want to be way more specific with how hard something is for you. We'll go over the specific reasons why that is a little bit later in the lesson. But first, we have to go over what tool we're even going to use to help be more specific with our assessment. So, what that is a 1 to 10 scale called RPE. Now, RPE stands for Rate of Perceived Exertion, and it's your perception on how hard something is for you in the moment of doing it. And again, 1 to 10 scale. So if we slide over to the right, we can kind of see we have a chart here to help figure out exactly what that means. So we'll use 6 as an example. So if something feels like a 6, that tells me that by the end of the last rep of whatever exercise you're doing, you could have done 4 more beyond that last one. So if we write out an example of what that kind of looks like, say we did 100 pounds for a given exercise for 5 reps, and by the end of that 5th rep, it feels like you could have only done 4 more reps, that would be a 6 on the scale. If by the end of that 5th rep, it feels like you could have only done 2 more reps, and that would have been the absolute limit, that is an 8 on the scale. So I'm sure you can kind of see how this is going to work. So if we go back to the chart, we can take a look and see 6 means you could have done 4 more, 7 means you could have done 3 more, 8 means you could have done 2 more, 9 means you could have done 1 more, and 10 means you could not have done another rep even if you tried, the absolute limit, or in other words, failure. Could not have done another one even if your life depended on it. And that's kind of the way we want to think about this. How many more you could have done if your life depended on it. So it can be a bit difficult to gauge this difficulty in the very beginning. It is kind of hard. It's not intuitive for people to be able to make that assessment accurately right in the very beginning. So we have another way we can think of this, and that is the right column. So if we're taking a look at number 6, could have done 4 more reps, or description, noticeably difficult, but the reps remain the same speed throughout. So that means rep number 1 was the same exact speed as rep number 5. You can tell that it was hard, or you had to put some effort in, but things didn't slow down by the time you got to number 5. And if we move on down to 7, we can see that 7 is challenging yet manageable. The reps slow down slightly near the end, but you would likely be able to repeat it a second time for the same weight, same amount of reps without the difficulty getting higher. So it would stay at the 7. All right, so out of 7 is when things start to slow down a bit. Number 5 is noticeably slower than number 1. You can actually start to notice or feel that you're slowing down on that 5th rep. If we go down to 8, again, 2 more reps you could have done. Moderately challenging, noticeable struggle near the end. The rep slowdown is much more noticeable, and you might not be able to repeat it for a second set with the same weight, same reps, without the difficulty getting harder. It is very likely that if we repeated the weight, it would just get harder, towards an 8.5, or even going up towards a 9 on the scale. Which brings us to number 9. 9 means it's very challenging. The rep slowdown is significant near the end, and maybe even stopping at a certain point before you actually finish the rep of the exercise. And you definitely would not be able to repeat it for a second set without it getting harder. It's almost guaranteed that it's going to turn into a 9.5 or into a 10, or you may not even be able to get all the way to 5 reps. You might tap out at 4 reps if you tried the same weight for the same reps after it was already a 9. And then that brings us to 10. Extremely difficult. Barely able to complete the last rep. Unlikely that you would have been able to do more weight even if you tried. Again, another way of saying you reached absolute failure. Could not have done another rep. This is the kind of way we want to think about it. This is the way that we can start getting that sense of how hard something was for you in the moment of doing it. Now, the reason why it is important that we kind of get this sense of how hard things are is because that is exactly what we're using to gauge all our decisions off of. For an example, the way people typically do things, they'll have 100 pounds for 5 reps, and then the next week they'll say, well, I did 100 pounds last week, so I have to do 110 or 105 pounds this week. And that's kind of their method or their decision-making process. They're just increasing the weight just because. But if we apply this RPE scale accurately, we may find that 100 pounds already felt like a 9. And if this already feels that hard where we only could have done one more rep by the end of it, it is extremely unlikely that we'll be able to do 110 pounds for 5 reps without it getting even harder. And then what people tend to do is they'll say, okay, I did 110 pounds for 5 this time. Barely survived, but I should just increase the weight again. 110 or 120. And now all of a sudden, it's unlikely that we'll even get to 5 reps. We might get stopped at 4 reps simply because you can't do any more. And this is the kind of way a lot of people approach their decision making when it comes to working out in the gym. And that is the exact way we don't want to do this. We don't want to just add weight because we feel like we should. We want to add weight because we have evidence that we can add weight. And that is where the scale comes in handy. Because if we know that 100 pounds for 5 reps felt like a 6, we could have done 4 more, we can be extremely confident in saying that we could definitely do 110 for 5, and it might just get a bit harder, maybe between a 7 or an 8, somewhere in that case, or in that range. And that is why it's important. Not only that, but on certain days, we can do the same exact set. So we'll just say we did this last week. And now this week, we do the same 100 pounds for the same 5 reps, and it's feeling harder because you're a human and your performance is going to fluctuate up and down for no given reason. The same exact weight, the same exact reps, but it felt harder than it was last week. And if that's the case, we know right away from the very first set that things are harder this week than they were next week. So now we can use that information to tailor the rest of the workouts with that in mind. We know that things are harder, so maybe instead of doing 110 like we did in that first example, maybe we'll just do 105. Or maybe we won't even do 105. Maybe we'll keep it at 100 and just do that again. Again, because we can tell it's harder than it was last time. This is the kind of way that we're going to make these decisions, not just random guesses. Everything is based off of what we have done before, how hard it was, how hard it's feeling today, so on and so on and so on. This is why this RPE, or how to gauge difficulty, is by far the most important skill to have. And the thing is, everyone will develop this sense for how hard something was in the moment of doing it. But if we're not intentionally thinking about it or intentionally using a scale like this to figure it out, it becomes way more difficult. Not only would it be more difficult, but it would also take significantly longer. So instead of it taking years to develop that sense naturally, we can do it in a fraction of the time by actively practicing the skill of gauging difficulty using a tool like RPE. And that's the thing. It is a skill. It's something that we have to practice and we have to develop. It does take time, but with things like RPE and all the other skills that tie into RPE, we can make that process way, way faster. And that is the whole goal. We want to develop all these skills as quickly as possible so you're in a position where you can make really good decisions on your own during your workouts, so that way you can get results for the rest of your life. And you can also deal with issues when they come up, because they will come up. It will happen to everybody. Everyone will run into issues, things they need to change, things they need to do, all of that stuff. So the sooner we can develop all these skills, the easier your entire fitness journey is going to become. And that brings us to the main goal of using RPE. Earlier I said that we want to use RPE to be able to tell how hard something is in the moment of doing it, but not only that, we also want to be able to tell how hard something is going to be before we actually do it. So we have a good sense of how hard 120 pounds is before we actually go to do 120 pounds. And it's all based off of how hard 110 pounds felt, how hard 110 pounds felt last week, how hard things felt the week before. All the different pieces of information that we have available to us can help us gauge how hard something is going to be before you actually do it. And with that said, we're not going to be 100% accurate, and we're not looking for 100% accuracy. All we're looking for is good enough. We cannot predict the future, so sometimes we will be wrong. But if we can get to a point where we're right, a lot of the times, it makes this whole process, the whole fitness journey, exercising, all of that stuff, way, way easier. And that brings us to the final reason why we use RPE, is because it allows us to assign a specific difficulty target for a given set of a given exercise. So instead of aiming for a weight target, we can aim for a difficulty target. And the reason why that's important is from what we just said earlier. Different days, the weights will feel different. We can have 100 pounds and it feels like a 6 one day, a 7 the next day, maybe a 5 the day after that, and it fluctuates up and down. So because of that fluctuation, we can't really assign an actual target, a weight target. We want to assign a difficulty target because the difficulty targets never change. They stay the same. The only thing that changes is the weight required to get to that difficulty target. So if we go back to the charts, we can kind of look at what we want that target difficulty to be. So we'll kind of start from the top. So we have this 1 to 5 range, and I kind of clumped these together for a reason. And that is because if we look at the description, it's no difficulty or even a slight struggle. It's kind of more of the warm-up weight. And what ends up happening is a lot of people, when they start working out, they keep things in this 1 to 5 range where things are simply not hard enough for us to actually improve or actually get better. This is way too easy for us to develop any kind of strength or muscle and things like this. And I've seen a bunch of people stuck going to the gym consistently, doing all the things they need to do, except for making it hard enough. And that's super, super important. So you don't want to spend all this time going to the gym and then have nothing to show for it because you're not actually making things hard enough. If we go to the opposite side of that, this 9 to 10 range, this is the other side where other people like to live. And they make things way too hard, way too often. Not only will we run into issues when we're making things this hard all the time, but it also makes it more difficult than it actually needs to be. It does not need to be this hard in order for us to get better. You're not going to get stronger any faster. You're not going to build muscle any faster by going all the way down here. And I think it is a common misconception that people feel like the workout needs to be harder than it was last time. It needs to get harder and harder and harder, or else we're not doing anything. And those are the kind of two extremes that a lot of people live in. And what we want to do is we kind of want to live in this middle range, the 6 to 8 range. The 6 to 8 range, things are hard enough for us to get better, but not so hard that we're killing ourselves in the process. And this is exactly where I keep all of my exercising as well, right in this 6 to 8 range. And this is where it's been for years now. And that's what I was saying earlier. The target difficulty is not going to change. The weight will change to match the difficulty. And that's what we're looking for. That's the whole purpose of RPE, to make sure all of our sets, all of our exercises are right in the range we want them to be. And we can develop the skill to accurately decide what weights will get us to that target difficulty. And so as you get better at gauging difficulty for yourself, you become the ultimate authority on how hard something was in the moment of doing it. Other people can give you some insight on how hard it looks from an outside perspective, but they can't feel what you feel. I can't feel what you feel, and no other coach on the internet can feel what you feel. And that means as you become really accurate with gauging RPE, you are the one that can make the best decisions for yourself. The better that you get at all of these skills, the more you put yourself in a position where you no longer need anyone else's help, because no one else can coach you better than you can coach yourself. And again, the reason that is they can't feel what you feel. That is why it is so important we develop all of these skills as quickly as possible so you can be in a position where you, by yourself, for yourself, can get consistent results for the rest of your life. Your goal is to actually learn so you can be completely independent and you don't have to rely on anyone else ever again. Then join the Fitness Academy community and you can begin with the Getting Started course for free. In there, you'll learn some of the foundational skills that you need in order to be independent. This is where your journey to independence begins.